like that, we're back after the quick break, and I've been joined by some pretty smart people here right now. We got Fabio, Marcus, and Johan. And before the break, before we entered into this, the lunch break, we asked a question, and this is kind of the result that we got in. Is there something going on? I need to. Okay, this is how it works when you need to move your mic around. That's life, but that's how it works. Okay, so before the break, we had a question and we got a couple of answers in. Is it possible to get some of those word cloud nice answers on the screen? Yeah, like here. So the question was, what is your biggest cybersecurity challenge for 2022? And these are the results that we got in. And if you look at this, you can see that it's a pretty broad spectrum. So what do you guys say? If we are, what do you take on this, Marcus? You know, when you see this, what's your take?
Well, I think some of them are really good, and but again, looking at the bigger picture, I think that is the perception of the most important challenges. I think
Correct.
looking at the real world, it's much more about if you work for an organization, you need to understand what are the real threats. I mean, what is going to happen to our organization next year or in the nearby future that would impact our business. So looking for that will actually direct you in what you should be doing. And how do you know it? I think it's really hard for most organizations because you read the papers, you get a perception based on what's actually published in the papers, or you have an internal dialogues, you have influences from this and that. I think real threat intelligence is getting more and more important. You need to somehow get intel on what the relevant threat actors are planning to do for next year to your business. So that's the starting point. And based on that, you should make your priorities. And then you should write down what's important or create your project, if you will.
But we had this conversation earlier when I asked someone, and they had pretty much the same answer. The trickiest question is, how do you know what's relevant to you? I mean, do you know your business that well? Do you know that all the things are out there? Because if you don't know who's going to target you, how can you defend against it?
Yeah, but I think like those questions show, I mean, just the variety of those questions.
For sure.
And they're all, they're all valid.
Yep.
And they're all true. So the challenge in itself is, it's just that, right? There is a lot that can potentially be done. So understanding what should be done first and what makes, what brings more value. That's the first question we should ask ourselves, right? And that's where you try to apply the insights, that you have from threat intelligence, like you mentioned, and try to apply that to your business, to your organization, to the risks that you can live with and the ones that you cannot live with, and then create a plan for that and be strategic about it and create realistic threat scenarios that are actually something you want to work with.
And this is something that the threat intelligence team apparently do, collecting live data and just comparing things. And
yeah, but I think it's bigger than that, because TI, or threat intel, you bring the threat actor and the attack's perspective to this discussion, right? Then you also have the question of how do you actually do something in practice? How do you implement the protection against something?
Yep.
Then it's a whole different discussion. Then, then you have people who work with infrastructure, with solutions and all that stuff. And then, so what's the most efficient way to do it? And how does that actually change if you consider the threats? So I think the win is putting those together. So you have an efficient way of doing something that actually brings value because it protects from something that is happening now.
And I think there's another dimension too. I think when people talk about threat intelligence today, they talk about brand intelligence, leak intelligence, all the things that could happen to you today. But it's really about prediction. It's about understanding the history and the present time in order to predict and calculate the future. So you can learn from today and from yesterday, but then you have to apply intelligence and understanding of where will this take us in the future. So protecting against the threats of tomorrow is not something you can do simply by looking at the past. Like if they used an exploit, for example, to target a large number of organizations, that exploit may not be efficient anymore in the future. So what would be the next step? So we're seeing trends right now, like threat actors are really focusing on mass exploitation, for example. They're trying to find high efficient paths into to a number of organizations simultaneously. We've seen that in the Hafnium attack using Exchange vulnerabilities, in SolarWinds. I mean, I can name many of those.
Minor.
The Kaseya attack, for example. So they're trying to find one vector that can be used to have high impact on a large number of organizations. So that's a trend. So we can speculate and calculate and predict what will be the continuous of that trend. What's going to be up next? Which types of softwares or which types of entry points into organizations will be exploited. And based on that, we can do predictions that are not really in the books.
That's true,
And
but
that's
we kind of also
important.
need to look at things the way they actually look. Because if we go back 2 or 3 years, like look at all the VPNs, like we talked about that before. I mean, we're talking path traversal. Johan, isn't we past that? Or, you know, it feels like the 90s is back again. What's your prediction?
Well, looking at the cloud, I think it's important to realize that that we also are aware that people is a big problem. Like a lot of these attacks comes back from people behaving poorly, being naive, or like opening emails and such. And a lot of these attacks could have been like potentially stopped earlier if we were a bit more cynical and a bit more skilled in how to behave. And I think that is a good thing, at least that a lot of people are aware that we need to be better. We need to become much more aware.
Yeah, and I think the right combination is to ensure that it's hard to do the wrong thing and it's easy to do the right thing, right? So we need to have technical mitigations in place. So, you know, for example, users can't do the wrong thing. So
Yes.
I think the right combination is probably the way to go, and it's true now like it was true before, and I would expect it's going to be true in the future as well. You're always going to have people around using systems with their credentials and the access they have. We can make it harder to go from one to another.
Yeah, we need several mitigations.
And I also think we need to understand the human weaknesses. I mean, looking at ourselves, it is very hard to produce unique and impossible to guess passwords and things. I think it's easy to say that the users are the weak spot, and I agree in many ways.
But
at the
users
same-
going to use. That's
Yeah, but at the same time, I think it's important that we understand that we can mitigate this using technology. And we shouldn't put too much burden on users. It should be easy to do the right thing. Today it's fairly difficult to do the right thing. So I think MFA is just a simple example out of many where you use technology to create a new solution. It makes it hard for a user to do something wrong. I think it's an unfair challenge for a user that they should be able to distinguish on what link they should click or not.
Yeah.
Technology should work that problem for us. So I think we need to take a bigger responsibility as a security industry and the tech industry as a whole to produce solutions that will be safe enough for the average user to actually work without having to worrying about being the reason for a large enterprise breach.
Yeah.
I think it's just unfair today. So
Yeah, and to be honest, when you talk about like a user being the reason of a large breach, that is often maybe the entry point for that attack, but that's not the reason why they actually got access to everything else. That's other types of problems normally. So it's easy sometimes to just put all the blame on a person and click
Yeah.
the link, which I think is very wrong. But there is a chain of events that happen there.
just like Hassan and showed before, you know, it's like 2-click process to dump the memory with Mimikatz and then be a domain admin if you're not working with local admin account.
And it's not even easy for an IT department or a security department, or even for an organization. I mean, many of the breaches that we investigate today and the organizations we help, they did not have a fair chance to calculate the threats. I mean, still today, most breaches are not published. They're not reported to the governments. The statistics are not there. So it is very difficult even for a board of directors, or the CEO of an organization to do the right investments, because there's so much going on under the hood, if you will. So I think this is something that is getting better over time because it's maturing. But I think one key point is that we need to stop stigmatizing individuals or organizations because they get breached. The blame and shame is on the threat actors. We need to help organizations and individuals working in these organizations to give them the tools so they can actually be strategic and take the right precautions and do the right things to create an environment where they can actually be secure and still doing their job. So again, I think we should shift focus from the misconfigured users and bad technology into the threat actors are the real problem, and we need to work together as the society as a whole to fix these problems, bring threat actors into justice, and make sure we have good enough security that is available to every organization.
And
That's-
usable.
Yes.
But it feels kind of like the current stage, when you look at it, is like, okay, you either go in jail for a lifetime or you drive really cool Ferraris. Current state feels like everybody's just driving Ferraris. It doesn't feel like threat actors are being caught the criminal way that it feels kind of glorified. And you see in the affiliation programs running and paybacks running through, it seems like an easy way to get money fast, and especially if you do it at scale. So what would be the solution to stop that? Is it even possible?
I get the picture in my head of Maxim Yakubets, the Russian threat actor. He prefers Lambos though,
Oh, yeah.
or Ferraris. And he has, his plate on the car actually says BOP, which translates to vor, which is in the Cyrillic Russian language, which is thief or mafia.
Yeah.
So they are celebrating their wins, and they are protected in some regions even by the state, which is horrible.
Yeah.
But I think the tide will turn. I think the fact that they are so successful is putting a lot of political pressure on the nations that are harvesting or harboring them.
Yeah.
So, and I think the European efforts, the US European efforts are getting more and more successful. We had some arrests very recently now in the organization that is suspected to be behind the Kaseya breach.
No way.
Yes, that is announced this week actually.
Yeah, we mentioned
public.
some of those successes in our first session with Matthias today, actually. That, yeah.
So
Years.
things are happening?
And that's a joint effort between various police organizations in various countries, and that's the other challenge with this criminal type of crime is that historically, when you had a crime committed in Sweden, you were chasing the threat actors in Sweden.
Yep.
Now you have to change them all over the world, and you don't have the capability to do this in the Swedish police system. It's just not built for that.
Yeah.
We have interactions with Interpol and FBI and others, but it takes time.
Yeah.
So that capability is building up. I don't think it's moving fast enough, so there will still be a gold rush for certain threat actor groups for some time, but it will catch up in the end. Why? Because it's starting to affect the society, and the society cannot accept it. It just have to stop.
Yeah. I'm passionate about that not being a thing. I really, it annoys me. And then I'm even on the offensive side. So I love hacking. I just hate cybercrime. I think it's just different things. In the current stage where you can see multiple reports on the shortage of IT people, like they talk about the shortage of cybersecurity experts and everything all over. Do you think that's a thing, or is it? Do we have a shortage of cybersecurity specialists?
Well, to be honest, they have a shortage of threat actors as well. They're actually actively very much looking for affiliates. And they're even building tools for automating their processes and such. So there is also a shortage on that side as well. But that's maybe off the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, but absolutely. I think people need to be more skilled in IT security overall. I think that is something that we should all be more aware and more skilled in. So once again, it come back to like growing competence in becoming more aware and more cynical or more like aware of what's happening around you.
Yeah.
I think that's important. But from a technical perspective, absolutely, we need more people that have these skills and interests in those skills as well.
Yes.
And we need to also, I think that the school system is adjusting to this. There are now cyber education in university levels, which is great. I think the defense in Sweden is making an effort. We're now training cyber soldiers also in collaboration with the university world. So I think that's a good progress. We, Truesec, we're taking the responsibility and driving Truesec Academy. We're training people to become the future specialists of tomorrow. So I think this is it's a joint effort between the private and public sector where we need to work together to create a new generation of specialists to handle this threat, because it's not going away. I mean, from a global perspective, our assets and business functions and our money is going into computers.
Yeah.
So as long as there are criminals, they are going to exist in the IT and cyber world. So therefore, this will never go away. Therefore, we need to have the capability to defend it.
Cool. Björn, even though you're not on, you mic'd up right now because we're out of mics. Did you have any questions in the chat from our friends in the chat? That's perfect. That means that they're gonna have a chance to ask those questions and think about the questions that these three gentlemen are gonna answer, because we now gonna have a shuffleboard showdown. So this is what is gonna happen. And also, by the way, as you know, which camera is it? That one here. That one. And also, chat as always. To get that chance to win that mystery Truesec swag box, you need to pick the winner. Is it going to be Fabio that's competing in shuffleboard for the second time? Is it going to be Marus Murray that hasn't played yet? Or is it going to be Johan? So F for Fabio, M for Marcus, and J for Johan. In the chat right now for a chance to win that magnificent Truesec swag box. Now, let's shuffleboard.
Don't bet on me. I never played shuffle before, and I'm older than the others.
Perfect.
Funny.
Okay, so this is going to work this following way. You got three pieces. You try to shift them over to that side, get as close as possible. The best point wins. But since we're having a beautiful audience with us here, and since you're quite tall, Marcus, I want you to scooch down a bit and just be quite close to the board when you send those away.
We have one opportunity.
Three.
And you
Three, and best of three.
You sum up the
So,
points. of three.
The one that is best of three.
Usually we
sum
wrote
them
Shambo before this, but you can start.
Sum them up. Oh my God, you need to like feel it. Okay.
Okay, do we have any guesses coming in here?
Ah.
Oh,
My
that's
God,
out.
that was hard. Jesus Christ.
Oh, still no points.
This is painful to a very competitive person like me.
I knew you would say something like that.
Ah.
Woo! 1 point.
Ah,
Oh,
that was
good.
painful. Painful.
Should I go?
Yes.
go.
Okay.
Go
I
ahead.
warned you.
That's the way it's gonna be.
That was
Oh,
really
it's a bit hard.
That was really hard.
He's very strong. It
But
means a lot.
but I only need one, don't I?
You do. Currently, you only need one.
Looks good.
3 points. He lands it
Nice.
perfectly.
Awesome. That
Current,
was impressive.
current leader is Max at 6.
Oh.
I have the advantage.
Really?
I've done this before today, so
Yeah.
I'm just saying. It's I'm probably gonna fail
And
anyway.
you're Italian.
How does that help?
Well, I don't know. I watch football.
Oh, he's wild styling it.
Oh!
Oh! Fabio wins with 5 points.
Awesome.
And you-
All
you-
Good job.
It's kind of cheating because it's his third time doing it.
Well,
So
I'm training and then doing.
Well, well,
you're being better. It's a good thing to see
Yeah.
that you can
See?
evolve in your
right.
game.
Training works.
I like that. I'm happy. Okay, so I did actually ask a couple of questions if people were on LinkedIn, to see if we can get some feedback around that. And I'm just going to open it up for the fun of it and see if we can have something. And the question that one of the interesting questions were regarding to the challenges, right? We talked about the word cloud and how basic it was, but how do you know your adversary and how do you know what they're actually looking for? We're talking about risk here and understanding risk assessment. What's your take on that?
Well, I guess it depends how you interpret the question, really. If you talk about like,
Really?
yeah, I mean,
Your
I'm
way.
just thinking, what ways to interpret it, because we can talk about the objectives,
Yeah.
right? Behind the group conducting these attacks,
Mhm.
or we can talk specifically about, in a compromised environment, what are they after from a technical perspective?
Yep.
We can talk about both, I guess. I mean, I think if I start from a technical perspective, I mean, it's usually a lot here about, the biggest or the most common type of attacks are nowadays ransomware attacks, as we talked before, and
Phishing and external assets.
well, I mean, yes, as entry points, the most common is exploitation of vulnerable stuff exposed to internet.
Okay.
And we talked about that. We need to patch quickly and have a good inventory of what's exposed out there. It's always been very true. It's more true now than ever because we just see more of those,
Yeah.
even compared to phishing. That used to be the most common one. When you look inside the compromised environment, there is a lot of effort into gaining access to everything because they wanna look for where you have your backups. They wanna look for where you have the data that they can steal, so they can use that as an additional leverage to put pressure on you for you to pay. So from that perspective, they look for the data that is critical to the business. This data that is not something that you want to be leaked, and that you're actually ready to pay for it not to be leaked.
So not the picture from the Christmas party. It's the really interesting stuff that they want after. Depends what kind of Christmas party you had, though. Sorry. But it's also interesting because both Hassan and some other people talked about tiering, and I'm coming from a network background, so for me, like segmentation and separating networks and making sure that people can't laterally move everywhere. We're talking going back to local user accounts instead of having those massively at scale domain admins accounts. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a combination. There is a part that is about the network, and there is a part that is about identities. When you talk about segmentation and protection and tiering and layers, whatever you want to call them, identities are always misused in an attack. There is no attack that doesn't involve using credentials to log on to something that they're not supposed to have access to. So focusing on that is definitely something that's gonna change how difficult an attack is to be successful. And I mean, we're talking about tiering for so long, but you know, like I was preparing a presentation last week, and I wanted to talk about tiering, and I took some older documentation from Microsoft about tiering in what they now call the legacy tiering model, which is for an on-prem AD. Now everything that is not Azure AD is legacy, like and the new tiering model is actually the enterprise model, and it's so much more complex. You have planes, you have different layers, you have guest access, external access, you have on-prem, you have multi-cloud, there's so much complexity in there that is really, really hard even to explain it in a comprehensible way, let alone to actually make it happen.
And just imagine sitting there as the board of a company, and you don't have that full insight. You know the business, but you don't know the technical parts.
And I think Fabio had a really good point. We have a lot of people who's been previously working with Microsoft who are now with Truesec. Johan is one of them. He's not the example, but but some of these people that's been working with us they have talking about these architectures, the reference architectures from Microsoft. This is how it should be done, and then. But they've been working on more the sales side. They're promoting that from a more theoretical perspective, if you will. Then they come to Truesec, and then they start implementing the things that we recommended. And then they realize that in the real world, when businesses have their everyday, transactions and work, you can't just make big changes in any way you want to. It has an impact on the business. So the challenges are often really, really big. So I think what we need to find is the balance between, where you are today and the vision, and how to create a path that is actually makes sense. And one thing that strikes me is that, again, we're doing a lot of investigations. That means we're writing reports on exactly how threat actors behaved in environments. From patient zero when they arrived to wherever they created a business impact or stole or broke things. So we kind of know, we have the blueprint for their paths through these environments. We know where they should be stopped. We know exactly where. And what is the biggest pain to me is when organizations are actually spending lots and lots of money on generic tiering models or network segmentation that wouldn't really have stopped the attacks. So being surgical, understanding exactly how these attacks are being executed, you can be much more surgical in your defenses. And that is really valuable to understand that concept. So I talk a lot about being pragmatic. We need to stop breach. We don't just need to buy security products or services. We need to stop breach. So how do you stop breach? Well, we understand what a breach looks like, and then we stop it. In certain places where it makes good sense, where you have the biggest impact. So, for example, like an organization with tens of thousands of computers, it can take years to actually create an environment that's hard to breach. But you could maybe start detecting breach in a day,
Yeah.
implementing the right tooling and competency and service, and then you can actually make sure that even though you get breached computers, you will not have business impact. So it's very much to me about being pragmatic. What does make sense? What stops the impact of a breach?
But then again, we talked about SolarWinds before. We talked about some other things that are based around supply chain, where you're trusting something. You think you've done everything right, and you're trusting this thing that's pretty sweet, and you're all good with it, but then supply chain attacks happens. Johan, help me through that.
Well, it's kind of easy because we are still very naive. We just download stuff from anywhere, and as developers, that usually is my target group. It's very common to just bring stuff down to the computer because you have like an isolated environment. You consider yourself at least.
Yeah.
But then you don't know. You don't have a plan. You don't trust the stuff that you actually download, and you open yourself to so much difficulties.
Dependencies, right?
Yes,
Blindly
absolutely.
trusting dependency.
Both when building stuff, like introducing dependencies into applications, but also like dependencies into your developer environment on your machine.
Yeah.
Which give access to pretty much everything, because usually people run with administrative rights.
Yeah.
And that's just a pain. And it's something we need to become even better at as well.
And predicting the future, I think DevOps tooling, DevOps platforms, that's going to be an interesting target for the next generation of threats, because then you get to the source that will be deployed in many different organizations. It can be third-party tools, add-ons, libraries, all of that stuff. I think it's going to be in the focus of proficient threat actors in the near future.
Yeah, and if you can get code smuggled into the production that's going to get pushed, then you're winning. Like that's kind of the way it goes.
Yes, and looking at the SolarWinds attack, it was highly sophisticated. They didn't even change the source code. They actually had code injection in the deployment system, in the build server, like real time, adjusting the code base in the compiled binaries. So you couldn't even find it in the source code in the store that was going to be pushed to deployment. So we're going to see more of that in the future, again about prediction. So if you understand that, then you need to start to challenge your applications and the access. So maybe even though you have a network application like SolarWinds, maybe it should not be the key to the kingdom. Maybe you can look at network traffic, but it shouldn't mean that you can elevate from that to complete compromise of an IT environment.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of look at this again from a pragmatic standpoint.
Blindly trusting your MSPs to giving them all the keys to the castle.
Yeah,
Also, it would be challenging.
that should be semi-trusted.
Yeah,
should be
exactly. And you should
trusted.
be able to detect if someone that is trusted suddenly do something bad, right? You should be able to detect
Shady
that.
stuff
Then
happens.
we get back to the detection capabilities. Whether it's because an employee or provider or a trusted party does something that is not supposed to happen, or because they are compromising their use as a way in, doesn't really matter. You should be able to see that.
Exactly, visibility. Back to the talk that David Lilja and the guys talked about EDR solutions, so that's pretty cool. Okay, awesome conversation. I learned heaps, and I'm so happy that you guys joined me for this this panel discussion to look into the future of what's going on. Right now, we're going to go for a break, so chat. If you have any more questions, put them in the chat, and these gentlemen is going to help you out to answer those later, because now we're having a break.